communists to the left of me, jokers, Nazis to the right. Here I am, stuck in the middle with Jew. Hey, you like what I did there? There it is. There it is. Welcome back to
Ami's house.
That was a long pause, Michael. I was like, what's happening here? But I guess
There's a lot to think about.
A lot to think about, a lot to ponder. How are we feeling, Michael? Sad, angry, depressed, disheartened?
If I had not been following this closely since the day before the primary, I would feel quite shocked and ungrounded. But I've been thinking about this pretty constantly for the last couple of months, so I'm pretty much in the same place I was before he officially won. How about you?
Yes, I kept saying to people, "Oh, so do you think Cuomo could pull this off if Sliwa pulls out?" Blah 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 blah. And I was like, bro, as far as this election goes, our side, the anti-Mamdani side, has the Kamalas. Okay? If this was Trump-Kamala 2024, remember how the Kamala people were like, I'm telling you, she's got this momentum, she's got strategy. And I'm like, she has no charisma, she has no vision, no message, she's just anti-Trump, and she can't answer a question. I mean, we had terrible candidates going up against Mamdani. He had all the charisma, he had the vision, he stayed on message, and so you got to hand it to him for that. But I want to talk about now the results because I am not surprised in the least. But now it really comes to show you some very disturbing things that I think point to a very disturbing trajectory going forward as to where we're at. You know.
Right, so this episode, we're going to continue our conversation about Nick Fuentes and Tucker Carlson. So if you saw last episode, we got really into that, and then we're going to talk about how that conflates with everything going on the left. It feels like a friend of mine sent me a message. I got Hamas to the left of me and Nazis to the right. Here Hamas. I am stuck in the middle.
Hamas and communists to the left of me, jokers, Nazis to the right. Here I am, stuck in the middle with Jew. Hey, you like what I did there? There it is. Stuck in the middle with Jew. That's the crazy thing that I feel right now, you know, as a Jew, using the phrase as a Jew. It's just amazing to me seeing Mamdani's victory, not in some random city, but in New York City, the epicenter of Jewish life in the diaspora and the epicenter of business, entrepreneurship, finance, all of these things. For him to win overwhelmingly here with the majority demonstrates to me just what people are willing to look past because of some floaty, inspirational talking points and platitudes. The types of radical beliefs, radical ideas that he is animated by, that he does stand for. And everyone just, because I don't think, if I'm being honest, I don't think a bunch of people said, I love Marxism, communism, Islamism, anti-Zionism necessarily, even though there's a cohort of his base that is in line with some of those things. I think it's a lot of like, hey, you know, I think New York is unaffordable, you know, and it's what he was talking about on Flagrant. Like, we have all these problems. We got to get the trains better. Like, free buses sound good, you know. And yes, I think there's a lot of economically illiterate people on the subject, or not so knowledgeable. They're too young to know that these ideas have been tried before and failed every single time. But I think people are just willing to, what's disturbing to me is they're willing to look past all of this radical stuff that's kind of being brought in under the radar because of these, alluring talking points that he's run on very effectively and very focused on. And that's just disturbing to me. You know?
What bothers me is they're willing to look past it for what?
Yeah.
You know, let's say he could make the city more affordable. I could understand how someone in their 50s, would be like, okay, you know, my priority here is not Zionism. I don't think it matters, and it's not something I care much about regardless. But if he makes it more affordable and my family can stay here for another few years, like, okay. I don't even understand what they're looking at, what they're looking past it for, because I don't think he's going to make it more affordable. I think he's going to make it more expensive. And that's the part that really gets under my skin. That's the part that really worries me, because it seems like there's some sort of spell almost. Like, I get that he's charismatic. I get that he's optimistic and makes people feel good. But it's like for such a thin platform and such thin ideas, they're willing to accept all these other very real, sort of frightening ideas, and that's what's like, what's going on here?
They're not even being pragmatic. It's not even a calculation of transaction where they're like, look,
Right.
hey, that Jewish issue, the Zionist stuff, like, I don't know about all that stuff, but he's a capitalist. He's got great ideas and he's going to help fix the city. It's like, who's buying all that stuff? It's interesting you say that because it reminds me there's a parallel. It's not the same, but I remember in the sort of full Trump derangement syndrome amongst Jews, conservatives, liberals, when he was running, people were like, how can you vote for this man? If you're a religious Jewish person, if you're a person of character, if you're a Christian, how can you vote for this man? And I think there were people who were always sort of Trumpies and on board with all of it. But for a lot of people who were conservative or pragmatic on economics, they made a calculation, a transaction that says, listen, Trump might not be the best guy personally. He might have foul language and be unpresidential, and I don't like that, but I like his stance on the economy, and he's essentially, in terms of policy, conservative in a lot of ways, going to elect conservative judges. He's going to get things that I like done in terms of things that I believe in policy-wise. So there was that pragmatic, transactional element of Trump support. And the worst things that detractors could say about Trump, I think, were way overblown, that Trump was a Nazi, that Trump is a white supremacist. I do think in those times that was hysterical and deranged and just not true. It was a smear to try to delegitimize him. In Mamdani's case, the worst things you could say about him ideologically are the things he proudly stands for. To call him a radical, a Marxist, to call him someone who's sympathetic to these radical jihadist movements in the Middle East, to say that he supported globalizing the Intifada and Palestinian liberation and Marxism and all of these things. This is the stuff he has said. This is the stuff is self-described within him. Abolishing prisons, defunding the police. This is his track record. It's not a smear. It's not an exaggeration. So the Mamdani derangement isn't derangement at all. It's just addressing and characterizing what he is, not mischaracterizing him. That's the difference. Right. And people are willing to look past not a caricature of Mamdani, but the real thing, because they think some socialist tried and failed policies that have constantly failed in the past are going to work this time. It's pretty nuts.
And I feel like this hasn't been spoken about enough. He's not being accused of being a socialist. Like, he is running as a democratic socialist. Like, he is a actual democratic socialist. And I know there's degrees of difference between socialism and democratic socialism. I know I've heard that to paint it all with a broad brush is a mistake. It varies between like, I don't know exactly what a democratic socialist is versus a Marxist socialist, but still.
No, I can break it down as far as if you're interested.
Do you know the difference? Yeah. What's the difference?
So one is death by homicide, one is death by suicide. So in other words, in some ways that's the caricatured way to describe it. But first of all, he's a Marxist, like communist, like seize the means of production by the government kind of thing. But first of all, people like the word.
How do you know that?
Because all of his phraseology, everything in his early interviews that he's talked about is all about public ownership of everything. Government seizing control, abolishing private property. Starts with billionaires, but really profit motive, all those things. He's against all those things. And that's all Marxist ideology. Now, I think in communism and socialism, there are these slight differences, but it's about phasing out capitalism into socialism and then into full-out communism, where all the means of production, there's no private property. Socialism is that the sort of the workers, the government own the means of production in the economy. And in democratic socialism, it's like one can describe it as that these things are voted. Everything is like worker co-ops. Every decision at a corporation is not made from the top down by CEOs and private ownership or shareholders. It's made by the workers. Everything is democratized, right? Every business decision is democratized, and therefore all the workers have an ownership stake in the company's profits and stuff. That's the idea behind it. The way it really breaks down in reality is that in a full socialist economy like Venezuela, they just nationalize all the industries. The government seizes power over everything. They ban profits. They seize private property. And it's totalitarian. In democratic socialism, what they're referring to when they say that is trying to point to countries like Denmark, Sweden, Scandinavia that have free market economies, but they also have large welfare program systems and social safety nets. So that's what they try to point to.
So how do you respond to someone who says Sweden looks pretty sweet? Mm-hmm. What's wrong with trying to make that here or make that in New York City?
Well, first of all, you can point to the fact that, and I'm not an expert on this, but I'm pretty sure they have, like, in some ways, less regulated market economies, less regulated capitalist economies, less corporate tax rates. And what they do is that on the back end of it, they have high taxes, and they generally are able to accomplish those things because they have a lot of natural resources, tiny populations, and they're all exactly the same kind of person. They're completely homogeneous populations, so they all can agree on certain things, and they're able to get things done efficiently in that way. So they're able to absorb inefficiencies and kind of come to common policy because they have a very different makeup population-wise, totally homogeneous. Everyone's a gargantuan blonde Swede or Norwegian. Right. They have no military budgets. They have a lot of natural resources and small populations. And they've actually had to gone through a lot of austerity measures and economic changes to pull back the spending because it needs to be generated by actual capitalist wealth. Otherwise, if you don't have that, you have nothing to seize from and pull from in terms of resources to spend money on. So a lot of times, like someone from, was it Denmark, I think, was speaking at Harvard and says, I want to tell Bernie Sanders something. We are not socialists. We are not socialist economies. I want to have a message for Bernie Sanders, who keeps pointing to Denmark. We have a robust free market economy. We have wealth. We have markets. And so he's trying to correct for that. And so I just think it's this disingenuous sleight of hand to be an actual socialist and say, I'm a democratic socialist. I think they just say that to soften the blow, to make it seem like they're democratic and free. So that's what they try to point to. Those are considered democratic socialists, but it's not a socialist economy in the Norwegian and Swedish country, in the Nordic, Scandinavian countries or whatever. So anyway, that's a little bit of the economics wonkiness of the conversation. The point is, though, what really disturbs me is just that it's less what Mamdani will do policy-wise on day one that's going to radically change everything. It's more about the reverberations of such a victory in such a city like New York that I think signals a couple of things. It signals to all the centrist Democrats, hey, you know what? Populism on the right worked with Trump and our centrist whatever policies. That's not going to work. We got to go more radical. It's working. They're actually winning elections. And Mamdani comes from the Democratic Socialists of America, a radical movement that seeks revolution to break down Western civilization and capitalism and Western hegemony and all the buzzwords they use. That's the world he comes from, and this is part of their plan that they state explicitly. And so it signals to the rest of the party that we're here now and we're seizing control. And it's actually a threat to Democrats as much as it is to Republicans. It's a threat to the Democratic Party as we once knew it, that it's now morphing into something much more radical, much more populist. And that's the reverberating effects of a victory like that is, to me, super disturbing. And allowing all those radical ideas into the fold, Here's
an interesting question. What if Mamdani, in a bizarre universe, was not running as a democratic socialist, but running as like a new right person from like the Marjorie Taylor Greene, Nick Fuentes, Tucker Carlson thing? Let's just say he had a completely different orientation.
Okay.
Can you imagine him actually saying the same exact things, but as someone on like the far right instead of the far left?
Not quite.
You know what I'm saying? Like, is he speaking directly to that horseshoe theory, new kind of middle? And what would be different if he was talking to the Tucker Carlson listeners? Yeah,
he would own in the way of playing identity politics. Yes, but different identities. If he was coming from that side, he would talk to whites and say white Europeans need to seize the power as we're doing. On his side, he talks about Yemeni bodega owners and Senegal and all the different various minority groups that he's appealing to, that broad coalition of a multicultural melting pot, and then excusing and providing cover for cultures like that and immigrants that come from parts of the world that may bring cultures that are anti-Western, and like somebody from the right wouldn't do that.
So maybe that's a little bit too far right, but I feel like talking about working class politics, talking about being anti a foreign government, the anti-Israel working class stuff,
yes,
I think works equally well for a Dave Smith fan, maybe. Let's not say
So
Nick
that
Fuentes.
well, Dave Smith fan is also maybe radically libertarian. So, but what you're pointing to is correct. Is I think on the economic populism side, it would be indistinguishable because someone from the far right and someone from the far left essentially hate business and achievement, entrepreneurship. They're all exploiters. Look at the way they talk about Bill Ackman now in the Candace Owens Tucker Carlson universe, demonizing him. How did you even get wealthy? I mean, why are you wealthy? Why did you deserve that? I don't think you did he create anything? Like calling into question finance, investment, achievement, meeting it with resentment, envy, and bitterness. Those are the same kind of animating features of both. So they meet there. They pick different battlegrounds and different sort of constituencies to appeal to for that grievance. You know, on the right, it's the white disaffected male. And I guess on the left, it's every other color, you know, as this broad coalition.
You know what? Like the white disaffected male is, I think, just another way of saying someone who might have gone to college, maybe not, but their life sort of didn't work out the way they expected it to. Is kind of the same person Mamdani's talking about. Forget about like the incel thing and the skin color thing. They're both speaking to the same type of person.
Except the left for so long in woke excess leftism demonized that very person, the white disaffected male that's now going to Nick and saying, fine, we're going to play this game and we'll just be us.
But my point is, I guess what I'm trying to say is I feel like with just a couple of turns of phrase, Mamdani could get him right back.
Could get who right back? Those guys?
Those white disaffected males.
No, he couldn't.
I don't know. That's
because they're
sense. Am I way off about that?
Yes, because they're racist.
Yeah. They're
racist.
Yeah.
But again, so is the left. The left is racist against whites and sometimes Jews and Zionists. So you know what I mean? Like they hate whites and white supremacy, and these people love white supremacy and hate every other color. That's they're two opposite extremes with parallel types of thinking. But they're not not in line. What's in line is sort of the radical left and sort of the Islamist jihadist things that they make excuses for to come in. And again, the right blames the Jews for all of that.
Has Nick Fuentes said anything about Mamdani?
No, because he's not.
But isn't that odd though? Like, wouldn't you think like a person of color running as a socialist in New York City should be a target for Candace Owens, should be a target for Nick Fuentes, and yet they're silent. I think it's because they don't actually have such a big problem with it.
Well, look, you're pointing something interesting, which is what Candace is trying to do, which is say it's not left and right anymore, guys. It's not left and right. I was going after leftists for so long, and trans and Muslim. That's not what it is anymore. And it's this other thing. They're trying to seize power and opportunity, and I don't think they're trying to create an alliance with the left per se, but what they're trying to do is seize the right-wing power and change it into their image. They're not what they accuse, because they really object to the whole multicultural and blame Jews for open borders and blame Jews for everything that's bad in society, frankly. But again, they accuse left-wing Jews of being the ones solely responsible for the rise of Mamdani. So what they do is they don't go after Mamdani, they go after their main target, Jews, because Jews are responsible for everything in their worldview. And unfortunately on the left, we don't have friends either. So it feels like, you know, reframed as this whole, in the form of anti-Zionism. So it feels like when you're looking as a Jew, you're like, man, Mamdani just got into New York. That's crazy. But at least we have the right. Nope. Now, the right is coming out. We're talking after sort of Ben Shapiro drew a firm line in the sand on sort of what's going on. Before Mamdani's victory, we were going to talk about that. It was like the schism that's happening in the conservative movement that's going on.
Can I say one thing about Mamdani before we move on to the Tucker Fuentes stuff? You know, I think for me, sort of, there's two things going on. There's the New York stuff, and then there's the Jewish stuff. I think whether or not Mamdani ends up being a great mayor or an awful mayor, the signal that the Jewish community has gotten is still very real and really needs to be digested and paid attention and acted on. You know, that you can have these opinions and New Yorkers will stomach them. You know, if you promise them free buses. But I mean, I think for me, where it kind of gets scary is the combination of those things. Where if as a New York mayor he's not good and the city becomes less affordable, you're going to have now a new generation that was already disaffected and disillusioned from politics, and they chose to believe in someone, and now he has even disappointed them even more. Well, so hold on. So a where do they turn now? Where do they turn their anger and disillusionment to? And B, when he hits a wall politically and realizes he can't deliver on some of the promises he's made, where does he go from there? What does he spend the rest of his time doing? What he's really good at is creating content, is messaging, is like shifting blame, is creating these very inspiring messages. And I think I don't know where he's going to sort of focus all of that if he can't do anything politically. But sort of a deteriorating city with a mayor who's really good at that stuff, combined with like soft anti-Semitism now kind of spreading through the city. To me, the combination of all that is what scares me, less so than that he's anti-Zionist. If he was an anti-Zionist capitalist with really great ideas who could really make the city thrive, I would be a lot less nervous.
Right. You're just saying because of the consequences of disaffectedness from things not working, which they will not work, is going to guarantee further disaffectedness and bitterness and grievance towards the very people he's blaming to begin with. Well, on that point, you asked me before, like, can you define democratic socialism and all that? One thing he gets very dishonest about is when he's pressed on what his ideas actually are and what democratic socialism actually means. What does he do? He just starts dropping random buzzwords like, when I say democratic socialism, I'm talking about extending dignity, a life of dignity for every New Yorker. Bernie Sanders used to do the same thing. Everybody should be able to live dignified. Who's against dignity? What a position to take to say, okay, that's my position. There's nobody who's against living a life of dignity or aspiring to do so. The devil's in the details. How do you want to do that? And he'll never go there. He just gives that answer as sort of an end-all be-all. Capitalism also wants a life of dignity and achievement and prosperity. So give me the actual policies and the actual energy. And he won't do that. He just hides behind ideas that you cannot be against, like health, wellness, dignity, prosperity. It's like ridiculous. Yeah.
Can we play a game? I want to do like a fake press conference in 100 days. All right. Yeah. Mayor Mamdani, the latest report came out that anti-Semitic violence is actually on the rise since you took office.
Yeah.
Do you take any responsibility for that?
What I will say to that is, I will work every day tirelessly on behalf of all my constituents and Jewish New Yorkers and Muslim New Yorkers to fight anti-Semitism and Islamophobia wherever it shows. Anti-Semitism and Islamophobia have no place in our city and have no place in our country. And I think that what Donald Trump has been saying is only encouraging that. And with Donald Trump in the White House, we've seen this rise. And Trump. And I will work tirelessly in partnership with the Jewish community of New York to make sure we continue to fight the rise in anti-Semitism and to free Palestine. I think that would help.
Mayor Mamdani, I have one follow-up question. You've had one tremendous success since you took office. Halal is now under $8, and it has wreaked havoc on our sewage system. Do you take any responsibility for that?
Well, kosher food is still expensive, so we need to work on that as well. But you're talking about people just shitting their brains out. Is that what you're saying?
You're so charming.
Yeah. What I will say is the price has gone down, and I don't know, eat it with your hands. Okay. I don't know if that was cringe, but whatever. We're having fun. But
let's move on to unless you got something.
I had one more comment on him. Is that the big question for Mamdani that everyone's asking now is, okay, so let's get behind him and see if he can make good on his promises. Let's see if his policies will work into action and actually achieve results. And my response to that is, that's not the metric that he's going to be measured by, because when they fail, he ran on a politics of blame. His whole platform is about blaming the billionaire class, the corporate greed, Wall Street. Those are the reasons for your problems. Government's the solution, so that when things don't work, it's just going to resort to the same tactic. These greedy billionaires are living so well, and we're not, and these aren't working. He's never going to take accountability for the fact that maybe it's the government policies that are actually making things worse, not better. This is always the unfalsifiability of the socialist arguments, because you'll always be able to point to disparities and say, and assume that the given is prosperity, the given is wealth, that everyone should just have this certain standard, rather than the anomaly being wealth and figuring out, oh my God, how do we do that more? Because the default is, for much of human history, is poverty and low standards of living. And then all of a sudden you introduce capitalism into things and things start skyrocketing out of that. So rather than trying to replicate that, he looks at that and says, okay, that's the new default. That's the standard of the way things just should be. We should just have resources, prosperity, and all of these things at our disposal. And the fact that not everyone does must be because of an exploitive capitalist class that is taking from people. He literally wrote a tweet that said, taxes are not theft, capitalism is, which is the inversion of truth. He literally wrote that. Yeah. Taxation is not theft. Really, the coercive, forceful taking of property from one person to another to transfer it is not theft. The free exchange of goods and services voluntarily is theft, according to his worldview. So when his policies fail, he's just going to blame the very same culprits that he did to win the election in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, I'm reading a book now. That was well said. Said. I'm reading a book now about basically how New York went from the Bronx's burning in the late 70s, where landlords were burning down their buildings to collect insurance, to where it is basically today, like the center of the financial world, like a billionaire's playground, et cetera. And it happened because the city gave over their governance basically to private business. And they said, like, we can't figure this out. We're about to go bankrupt. You figure it out. And within a few short years, new banking markets were invented, like the commodities market. I don't know about commodities, but like the junk bond market, like literally in a few short years, it went from like no one wanted to go to Tribeca to like everyone wants to live in Tribeca because they sold the city to private industry. And it was good because buildings weren't burning down in the Bronx and the city had balanced books, but it also had some unforeseen consequences, which is like, by 2025, you're going to have a class of people who don't feel like they can live there anymore and are very, very frustrated. So like, I do think there needs to be some solutions, and there needs to be a way to maybe backtrack a little bit and find some sort of middle ground where like the working class can live in New York again. Again, I don't think he's going to be able to do it, but I think I don't think he's so wrong. I just don't think his solutions are going to
He's wrong prescriptively, not diagnostically.
Yeah. Right. Well, I'm sorry. The reason I brought it up because you said prosperity, people assume should just be the given. But I'm saying like prosperity was an intentional act in like the year 1980 to like have what we have now. Right. And now we have it, but that can go away quickly, the same way it came quickly.
But you can only flaunt these like big socialist ideas on the grounds that there's wealth to seize to begin with. In other words, you just assume once you get used to a certain standard, oh, that's just the way things are. And there isn't some system or mechanism that actually grants and allows for that wealth to be generated. These people think like we just take from one person and give it to the other, and that will introduce spending into the market by forcefully redistributing wealth. And that completely disregards what generates wealth to begin with. The ingenuity, the investment, the risk of capital, all those kinds of things. And then what happens is when things get wealthy and prosperous, the government comes in and says, ooh, okay, how can we create grievance and envy amongst different people and start taking from the people who've created this and generate this and sustain it and make these promises? That's why it's easy to win on.
I don't want to get too into the weeds here, but the counter argument to that is like, yes, creating value and taking risk is what capitalism is. Yeah. That is not what Goldman Sachs is doing necessarily. Like that is not what these huge private equity companies who are like making trillions of dollars are doing. They're not creating value. They're sucking value out of other things, figuring out a way to financialize it, spreading the risk over other people, and then just making a ton of money. That's not necessarily capitalism, and that's not necessarily that's not providing value for anybody, and it's not really taking big risks.
You think that's all Goldman Sachs is doing?
I'm not saying that's all.
Or there's a portion of it.
It's easy to point to like it's easy to capitalism has its issues now also that need to be addressed, I think. And he's speaking to that.
He's speaking to that. I know you don't want to get into the whole thing. I know you could one can risk romanticizing investment banks in all of their glory, like Ayn Rand style. These
forget Goldman Sachs specifically. I don't mean that specifically.
But it's a good example because, like, as opposed to steel or commodities where they're making things that we all need and use, it's easy to point to the investment banks in between because, frankly, no one understands what they do. But not understanding financial transaction doesn't mean they're not essential.
I could give you some specific examples, and I'm sure a lot of what Goldman Sachs does is beneficial and productive, but not everything they do is pure capitalism.
I would point to the areas where they're
And that's-
not really creating value. You invariably find the government's involvement and them kind of working within an environment that they can use certain things that the government intervenes on, distorting the prices, distorting the markets, distorting incentives. And we can get into that whole conversation another time.
We'll
But
save that for the Patreon.
But generally speaking, also nirvana and utopia is not for this world. There's always going to be these disparities. The question is, what can benefit the most amount of people in the most moral way? Having said that, yes, diagnostically, there are issues that need to be addressed and I think could be made better. I'm a capitalist. I believe in market forces to be able to do that. I think the government wants to make those same exact problems much, much worse. And then they blame the same people for it. And there's no political incentives not to do that because you're not punished for those failures. Look at Gavin Newsom. He wrecked San Francisco and now he wants to be president. Just keeps working his way up as if nothing happened, you know? You're punished in the market a lot more severely than you are in politics. It's quite the opposite. Anyway.
All right, let's move on.
Let's move on.
So if you... By now, everyone's heard about the Tucker Carlson Nick Fuentes interview, whether you watch our show or don't. We're going to talk about the response to it.
One of the things we discussed earlier was that we find ourselves now in a society which extreme positions are being mainstreamed. Mamdani's extreme leftism and Marxism and sympathies for revolutionary movements, jihadist movements, those kinds of things are becoming kind of just acceptable in the conversation, in the marketplace of ideas, and are being nudged into the mainstream. And on the right, you have this conversation centered around essentially Nick Fuentes and the Groyper movement becoming palatable, mainstreamed, and it's unapologetically racist, bigoted, misogynistic, anti-Semitic, of course, primarily I'd say animated by anti-Semitism, but all the worst ideas you could think of are now being mainstreamed. And it's being characterized by some on the right as, listen, we're a party, we're a movement on the conservatives that have respectful disagreements. That's what we do. But I want to just make the point, and then we'll get into it. It's not about where we disagree. It's about where we first agree. You have to have common basic values and agreements, you know, before you can start talking about other things like policy or even philosophy. Because if you and I, if we were on different ends of the aisle politically, like I can't discuss tax policy with you, Michael, if you're also a serial killer and you don't believe I as a Jew have a right to exist or women should be beaten by their husbands or raped, then we can't discuss other kinds of disagreements if we don't have a common basic set of values. And I think conservatives too many of them are having a blind spot to identifying a lapse in basic values and therefore saying, Nick Fuentes, listen, we don't agree with him, but people should be allowed to talk to him. And I will say that, like, you know, him on Tucker Carlson, for example, it's not even that Tucker Carlson had him on. It's that it was a nice, cozy, charming, chummy interview. If he had him on and gave him the Ted Cruz treatment and really grilled him, I think a lot of people, even you and I included, would be like, oh, okay, that was interesting that he did that. Anyway, so Ben Shapiro had this.
I mean, Ben Shapiro said it really well in his response. He said, Nick Fuentes is not to the right of me. He is not conservative whatsoever.
Yes.
He's not in the right wing of American politics. He is something else entirely. And then he said, but if you watch the Tucker Carlson interview, you wouldn't know it.
Mm-hmm. And that's what I keep saying when people ask me about this interview. I'm like, it's not what was said explicitly in the interview. It's what was ignored. Tucker Carlson has a guy on who has a record of hours and hours of footage demonizing Jews, speaking about how blacks are inferior, like actual racism, all the caricatures that the left called the right for years is Nick Fuentes. It doesn't make him conservative or right wing. If anything, it probably makes him more collectivist left wing with a different identity, white nationalist Christian Catholic identity that he's trying to co-opt, and and Tucker is the one facilitating demoralization and division of a coalition by you can't unite with people who seek to divide you, and Tucker's having this person on, and as Ben described, he's laundering his views and providing cover for the worst ideas he has and making him seem mainstream and palatable to audiences that otherwise said, oh, that seemed kind of, we spoke about it last week, but to me, it's so easy to unite the right. All you got to do is say, yeah, those ideas are disgusting, and perpetuating and putting out those ideas to the mainstream audiences is also despicable behavior. That's gross. Shouldn't do that. We don't do that. Anyway, now let's focus on the left-wing opponents. Like, that's clearly where our line is. And it's so simple to do that. So the people refusing to do that, I think, are, blood is thicker than water. They're confusing their personal relationship with Tucker to say, listen, we just have disagreements with Nick Fuentes. That's what conservative movement's all about, having disagreements. only to a degree. A Democrat and Republican disagree. I also disagree with serial killers and rapists, but they're very different kinds of disagreements. So it's just childish.
So to me, it seems like the response has been like older, stuffier, real conservatives, I guess, have really taken issue with this whole Tucker thing. But the like pop culture on the right has not. And the momentum seems to be with Fuentes Tucker and against kind of Ben Shapiro. Am I reading that right or wrong?
Well, the issue now, obviously, in a post-Charlie Kirk world, but in a turning point world, is where does this movement go? What's exactly in this movement? And there are disturbing moments like J.D. Vance taking a Q&A, right? We could talk, he was at a Turning Point event. I believe it was a Turning Point event. And one question after another was just full of anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish tropes. Right. And he was trying, I think, to be sort of the older guiding uncle to these kids who are like, listen, guys, I kind of hear what you're saying, but also J.D. Vance did condemn Nick Fuentes as a loser and someone not to pay attention to. I think rather than condemn and shame these kids who've been influenced by Nick Fuentes, he's trying to steer them on the right path. But it just is evident as to what's been facilitated and created here. We can roll a clip. I think we should play a clip of J.D. Vance taking one of these questions. And we'll put it in.
Okay.
So you said something to me earlier. Yeah, you said something to me about this with regard to what J.D. Vance's posture, which is what? He was trying to say, you know, his empathy for these kids. Yeah.
Right, yeah. So I read Ellie Lake wrote a really good piece in the Free Press where he was saying the same way Kamala signaled during her campaign to the pro-Palestine community. You know, she said all the right things, but in her own way was signaling like, don't worry, my empathy is with you and with the Palestinians. To make clear which side she was really on. J.D. Vance has been doing that the same way to the Groypers. So I think someone asked, what do you think of Israeli influence on American presidents? I believe his answer was, he ain't controlling this president. Which Ellie Lake pointed out really well was he didn't say Israel doesn't control American presidents. What he basically was saying is like, wink, wink. I know they do too, but you don't have to worry about it with me or Trump.
Right. There's an affirmation there in their suspicion, which is
it's
disturbing.
Not very reassuring for Jews if he's going to run in 2028. That's how he's and I think also like what we saw with Mamdani, like whether or not he believes it, I don't know, but like posturing that way is scary and has consequences, and I don't think should be forgiven on the left, and I don't think should be forgiven on the right.
Right. Yeah, and the truth is it's weird because you see the way Nick Fuentes describes J.D. Vance as a race mixer because his wife is Indian. I mean, that's why I'm cautiously optimistic that the movement doesn't work because doesn't have integrity. It's not based on sustainable good ideas, and I think there's a silent majority of people who are like want to take care of their families. They work. They're not part of these like screamers on Twitter. These young disaffected youth. I think eventually, if they get their lives together, they'll start to be like, you know what? I see a lot of Jews who, have good communities, good family, good values, and a lot of this hate weird stuff. Like, yeah, if you're asking yourself, should I be on the side of Candace, Tucker, Andrew Tate, Myron Gaines, Jake Shields, or the other side of that? I'm thinking which side is more villainous and nefarious. It seems pretty obvious if you just kind of zoom out of it for a second. Which side is trafficking in bigotry, resentment, envy? That's not the kind of side you want to be in long term. I get why it appeals to young men right now who are, trying to figure their way out of things or looking for a scapegoat. But I'm cautiously optimistic that there's a silent majority that is like sensible, reasonable, and decent. And to me, it's so what the right is making it. This new Groyper movement makes it very easy. Their ideas are not just respectful disagreements. They're sick. They're the worst ideas that we've ever known about, like racism and anti-Semitism and violence. Like, they're not conservative. They're another form of collectivist trying to infiltrate a movement. And so I'm cautiously optimistic about it. But
I think this week was basically a lot of Jews that I know panicking because there's very little to reassure us.
Right.
During the presidential election, there was the reassurance, okay, Trump is Trump. We never liked him before, but hey, at least he has our back. And
Right.
the left, we've lost the left, but the right's good.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the last week or two has really made people question, like, I don't know. I mean, even if right now is okay, what's reassuring me that over the next 2 to 5 to 10 years, things are going to get better. And it feels like we have less and less to reassure us, and it's a pretty scary feeling.
I hear that. I said to you earlier, it's we were talking off camera. I think this is sort of the result of populism just being on the ascent all across the board, left and right, which is that what populism really is just sort of politics based on emotion. It's not based on reason, ideas, or a principled platform. And Trump, for all of his strengths, I think could have, I think we just happened to be lucky that Trump was pretty capitalist, pretty pro-Israel, pro-Jewish, and pro-Western. But if he wasn't those things and he had all the charisma he had, I think he could have won over the same exact people, over the same exact grievances, with a whole different platform of ideas. And it would have worked just the same. It's the same with Mamdani. I think people are voting for people that they connect with. You could look back to Obama. A lot of people... I remember having an argument at the time with someone voting for him. I was like, what ideas of his do you like? What policy do you like? And they said to me, it wasn't you, don't worry. But it was other people, like the fervor and passion, the excitement, enthusiasm for him or Mamdani or Trump is emotional. It's him being able to speak to those things. It's not prescriptive as to, I think his tax policy is good or his policy on regulation. I think he could have had a whole different platform and said, it's these businesses. We got to seize their assets, these businesses. We got to take them. And Israel, they're too much in our business, this Israel country. I'm not going to support them at all. It's terrible. And, a lot of these Jews, they're taking our money. They're taking our resources. They're seizing our country. We got to stop them. Now, he didn't say any of those things. Thank God. But I think if he did, there still would have been a lot of people on board. You know what I'm saying? Because of the way it makes them feel. Instead, he went after Democrats, liberals, far left. He's anti-Hamas, anti-jihad, all that kind of stuff. So his charisma and character and style are all in that favor of the right ideas. But don't be fooled to think that it's the right ideas that are animating these votes. It's the person.
I think people on the right now are getting the feeling people on the left had in 2016, where it's like, okay, I get that you're voting just for a guy, but like this guy.
Yeah, with Mamdani, you mean?
Yeah, I see right through him.
Yeah,
like I said that about Trump in 2016, and now with Mamdani, I'm like, I get that you like him, but like him, come on, you don't like see what I see here, and it's real. It's this scary, alienating feeling where you're like, what is it that you see?
I think
don't get it.
It reveals what really kind of drives people in terms of politics is, and the more populism you introduce into the culture, the more it's just about grievance, blame, how I feel. If I feel disaffected, then whatever guy's going to advocate for me, it becomes very, very, I would say, tribal and team sporty and not based on principles or ideas. But speaking of tribal, there's a clip I want to play because Tucker, in doing this sort of response to Ben Shapiro, was on Dave Smith yesterday, I believe, and said something I find so fascinating and revealing and interesting. And it reveals his sort of, I think, disingenuous posture in the way he presents these things. So let's roll that clip.
Like, that's non-Western thinking. We don't allow that. Your country comes before your tribe, no matter what tribe it is. Tribalism leads to genocide. We can't have that. The only way to preserve the United States is to emphasize citizenship, our common Americanness. And the overwhelming majority of Americans want that. It's just kind of that simple. And I'm just grateful that we can have this conversation for the first time.
Notice what he said at the end where he goes, he's talking to Dave Smith and he says, you can't put tribe before your country. That's genocidal. That leads to genocide. You can't put tribe above your country. And Dave Smith is just nodding along with him. Now he's telling you to what? Not put tribe before your country. And he's praising putting country first, America first. Talking to Dave, who's an anarchist, who doesn't believe in countries or states or things of that nature. At his core, Dave is like an anarcho-capitalist who's just an individualist, and yet he's nodding along with Tucker and being very agreeable. And I just find it like such a disingenuous thing, because what does he mean by tribe? I obviously think what I said before with this blind tribalism, I get the point about it becoming clashy and violent, but he's using that argument to say how Jews shouldn't care about their own community or their own people, and saying that you have to put America first before all those things. But hey, Tucker, what if America turned anti-Christian? And what if we got a left-wing government in there that started persecuting Christians? Would you put America in that that makeup as an anti-Christian government before Christians? Hey, Tucker, let's ask you some questions. Jesus or America? I mean, these are ridiculous comparisons.
For Tucker, though, I think he would say America is Christian, so being anti-Christian is being anti-American. I think that's where it's different for him.
But I don't
agree. But.
No, but that's the whole false conflation. That's the move he's trying to do, which is to say, oh, you can't accuse us of dual loyalty because I'm just going to make America and Christianity and my personal religious beliefs one and the same, which is theocracy. I'm going to impose my sensibilities, my religious belief, my sort of tribe is going to be the one that dominates and becomes America. And I'm going to, while doing that, accuse Jews of dual loyalty and all this nonsense. Whereas everybody knows we put tribe in a very sort of literal sense above country, in the sense that I said last week, like our families, our communities, the people we actually know in real life. America as this idea is to allow for those things, for individuals and their families and their communities and their religions to thrive freely. And Tucker's the one who wants to combat that by making it seem as if these people are to be suspect and they're not putting America first. That's a tribal thing, to put a collective country before your own values and your own things. The American value is in simpatico with what I'm saying, which is religious tolerance and letting people have their own values that they can pursue as long as they're tolerant and allow other people to do the same. And he's saying that to Dave, who's just going, yeah. And, Dave, at his core, completely disagrees with that philosophy, but, of course, is being agreeable in the interview. So it's like, it's kind of a ridiculous thing. The common American value is exactly the opposite of what Nick Fuentes, certainly, and Tucker, who's putting him on and broadcasting his views to the world, is standing for. So, that was my response to that clip. Anyway, I find it ironic and revealing of the confusion he tries to traffic in.
Dave's had a good year, huh?
I mean, I think it's a big mistake, to be honest, to be throwing down your lot with, Candace, Tucker, and this side of the aisle. I think in the long run is going to implode. I don't think it's going to work out.
I'm imagining him at a party in like 7 years. Just with like the most despicable people, just having a drink, looking around, being like, "How the hell did I end up here?
Hey, what's up, Jew?
Friends?
What's up? Oh, the Jew is here." Yeah, I just mean like, if you're having questions about which side of this one should be on, it's funny because it seems obvious to Dave. It seems pretty obvious to me, and I think in the end, it's not going to work out in terms of. I think there'll be some serious regrets if you're someone who. I don't know. I mean, especially if Dave, who's spoken out against neocons and liars and all that stuff, and yet he's throwing down, defending Candace, knocking it out of the park when she's been so dishonest. But anyway, yeah, sorry, I interrupted.
No, I look at it very, very high level, where it's like, how did Dave Smith go from kind of obscure member of Legion of Skanks to like kind of like a household name, like around the Shabbos dinner table, And he did it just by being like anti-Israel. Being like kind of like anti-Israel, like he like, and like, why is he speaking to Nick Fuentes and Tucker? Because like that's kind of the natural, if you're not fighting it, that's the natural organic progression towards growth for your podcast right now. And I'm saying disrespectfully, I don't think he's thinking that deeply about it.
Right.
I think he's just sort of doing what feels right and what feels natural. And that's the natural way towards growing your podcast. And that's what bothers me more than his personal opinions.
Yeah. I mean, totally. I think actually it's a huge strategic, practical mistake, because if you're going to be on the anti-Zionist Israel critics side of things, I think that's fair and legitimate. And I've always kind of defended him for that from like I think, gross mischaracterizations or smears or attacks or things like that. But then you give your whole game away. If you're going to play close to that edge, don't then go bring Jake Shields on Legion of Skanks and say, nah, he's cool. And then have Nick Fuentes on and say, listen, you're anti-Semitic, but I don't mind. And then tell Jews you're being paranoid for the rise of anti-Semitism, and then indulge with it, befriend it, engage with it. Then you're saying, like, if anything, I think you should be super prudent to say, this is my line, and I would have much more respect if he actually would condemn the Jake Shields of the world and the Nick Fuentes of the world for their behavior, because that's not what he's doing. That's not the game he's playing. It makes his case against Israel's policies in Gaza and against American foreign aid to Israel much, much stronger when you have the integrity to draw those clear lines on principle. But for him to not do that and bring Jane Shields in, who's disgusting on Twitter and disgusting in real life, talking about Holocaust denial, Jew hatred, blood libels, and to say, nah, he's cool. I mean, well, then I can't take you seriously anymore. And I think you do a disservice to your argument.
I think he's an unserious person, and I bet you he would take offense to that. But I do think he's an unserious person, as opposed to Tucker, who I think is a serious person and is thinking very intentionally about this and about how he's going to grow his channel and influence.
Yeah, I don't know about unserious in the way that I think he always can have, the way we all do, like we're just comedians talking about things, and Tucker comes from a journalistic world. But the point is to not have the foresight to see that, you doing this and crossing that line really delegitimizes your judge of morality and judge of character in a lot of these people. And I just think it's not going to work out in the long run in terms of integrity, which is the most important thing in the long run to maintain over the course of this, that you threw in with people who don't have any of it. So anyway, that's that clip and that reaction to it. I stand by it. And I don't know, Michael, where do we go from here? How are you feeling?
I think I am. I think that the Jewish community and political organization of that community has been totally caught off guard and blindsided. And our generation really needs to find our ability to go knock on doors and organize and influence and figure out the right strategy, the way AIPAC did whenever it was started, and the way like the Never Forget movement probably started like in the 70s after like during the Eichmann trial. We had these moments where we're like, the Holocaust happened, we have a plan on how to like, memorialize it going forward whenever that happened in like the 60s or 70s, and I think we're probably going to need 1, 2, 3 years to figure out how to deal with the new realities of politics. And I think it'll happen. But
I would just say
I'm also okay. Go ahead.
No, I was going to respond to that saying, do you think that you're thinking too much from the perspective of granting the haters power to lay claim, and therefore you now have to rebrand and try to do things to make sure they stop hating you? I'd rather just be and just do what we do and not have to.
I don't think that's a realistic stance in the diaspora. I don't think I think that's an Israeli attitude that works really well in Israel and doesn't work really well in the diaspora. No, I agree with you. I think on an individual level, that's exactly what Jews need to do. They need to put their kippah on, go to shul, daven, put your tzitzis out when you're walking around the street, be proud and be who you are and know who you are. Yeah. But on a collective level, I don't think it works to just be proud. And B, the other positive thought I have is throughout almost all of Jewish history, when a scary leader got elected, you just kind of had to stomach it and hope things don't get worse. And we're lucky enough to have a place to go if we want. Right. I feel grateful for that and happy about that.
Israel is the difference in the state of today's chapter versus previous historical chapters where we didn't have that. But I would simply say that there's a part of it that over strategizing, over attempting to giving Jews a cause when we didn't need to necessarily. I'm trying to think about how the word anti-Semitism lost all its cultural power,
but it worked for many decades, and now it's not working, and we need to find. Maybe part of it. Sorry to cut you off. Maybe part of it is backing off a little bit and not fighting so much. But I would do that strategically.
I'm just saying, not obsessing over the hate and the danger, but more obsessing on the positive and not worrying about the mischaracterization. It's like, oh my God, he mischaracterizes this person's an anti-Semite. Get him, rather than they're not going to work out for themselves because this doesn't. The anti-Semite hurts themselves more than it hurts the Jews.
We talk a lot about what Jews are not. We don't talk at all about what Jews are.
That's what I mean. Defense versus offense, which is just like, I don't know. If someone's trying to bring you down, like if I kept trying to insult you and lie about you, would you spend all your time trying to prove me wrong? Or would you try to dispel every claim I made against you? Right. I think that would be a waste of your time.
I didn't mean a media strategy. I meant more like a political organization strategy. Like,
Right. You're talking about being grassroots and civically engaged in a way so that we can actually not be blindsided by where did mom. I think what you're effectively saying
sure,
is
sure, that's a better way to say
increase
it.
our Jewish civic engagement so that all of a sudden Mamdani doesn't appear and we go, hey, wait a minute, where did that come from? And where did all this hate come from? Take your head
And
out of our
right.
asses, take it out of the sand, look around, be civically engaged, not just insularly but outwardly, so we can be aware politically and culturally what's going on. You know? 1 second.
Okay, let's wrap it up, guys. Thank you for listening. If you've gotten this far, you've probably heard us say on other episodes that we have big announcements coming. We do. It's taking a little bit longer than we expected, but keep with us. We're going to stop teasing it, but stick with us. Me and Ami are very dedicated right now. We're more motivated than ever. So thank you for watching. Subscribe, like, Patreon, all of it. Tell your friends. Share this with them. Send it to your parents if your parents need something to watch.
Yes.
And thanks for sticking with us.
We appreciate all of you. We hope we can provide some common sense, some nuance, some understanding in a very chaotic, uncertain, and scary time. And this time an actual scary time, not in all the decades where we always say it's a scary time. We kind of mean it this time. And we will stay the course and keep our heads steady and even, and we'll keep chatting. We'll keep talking. And remember, everybody, criticism is not cancellation. It's not censorship. It's the opposite. So just remember that when you hear criticism, and don't let people confuse you on the left or the right. Thanks for watching. All right, Michael. Peace.